Welcome once again. I'm Mindy Mandell, and in today's video I'm going to talk about propositions 146 through 150 in Proclus's Elements of Theology. And this, of course, is part of a series of videos on the elements of theology. I will link the playlist here. As I've been doing throughout the series, I am using the E.R. Dodds translation. And for those of you who do not have the paper version of it, there is a link in the description box for a PDF. And today's video will start off with proposition 146. This is a short proposition that might perhaps be easy to overlook. However, it is actually an important one. In this one paragraph, Proclus describes the order and the beauty of the cosmos. And the principle by which this entire journey, whether you call it philosophical or spiritual, but the principle by which this entire journey is possible is captured here. High praise for one paragraph? Well, let's take a look at it. It reads, "In any divine procession, the end is assimilated to the beginning, maintaining by its reversion thither a circle without beginning and without end. For if each single processive term reverts upon its proper initial principle from which it proceeded, much more surely do entire orders proceed from their highest point and revert again upon it. This reversion of the end upon the beginning makes the whole order one and determinate, convergent upon itself, and by its convergence revealing unity in multiplicity." So what is Proclus describing here? First, he tells us that each single processive term reverts upon its proper initial principle. Here is proposition 31. It reads that all that proceeds from any principle reverts in respect of its being upon that from which it proceeds. But notice how Proclus explains this reversion. And this is in yellow. It says that all things desire the good, and each attains it through the mediation of its own proximate cause. Therefore, each has appetition of its own cause also. So it is this desire for the good that causes this reversion. We sometimes call the good the final cause. It is that for the sake of which other causes function as causes. The good is what fuels our philosophical journey as well. It is why you're watching this video right now, why you're studying Proclus's Elements of Theology. We all desire to know what we are, and in order to know that, we have to know our cause. We have this innate hunger, and people throughout history have attempted to quench this hunger in a myriad of ways, and, well, some are more successful than others. But going back to proposition 146, we see Proclus applying this same logic to the divine orders. Here he tells us that entire orders proceed and revert. They proceed down into multiplicity, but then, through reversion, they fold back into unity. The whole order becomes one and determinate, and in this way, it reveals unity in multiplicity. So this proposition captures the mystery of one and many sharing some sense of identity. There is a sense in which we can talk of one and many as opposites, and yet we're seeing here that there is another sense in which they are not opposites. And so this is why I maintain that this proposition captures the beauty and order of the cosmos. And now, let's take the next step. In any divine rank, the highest term is assimilated to the last term of the supraadjacent rank. And the superadjacent rank, you might recall, is the order one rank up. So we are seeing the orders linked into one long chain. There is continuity in the divine procession. And Proclus's explanation starts off in this way. For if there must be continuity in the divine procession, and each order must be bound together by the appropriate mean terms, the highest terms of the secondary rank are of necessity conjoined with the limiting terms of the primal. And why must there be continuity? Well, Dodd cited Proposition 132. All orders of gods are bound together by mean terms. And we see here that all procession of things existent is accomplished through like terms. And so much more do the ranks of the gods, which are supra-existential beyond the procession of things existent, so much more then do the gods possess unbroken continuity. So this maintains wholeness within each rank of gods. Okay, so what? Well, if this continuity is true, and if mean terms are what maintain wholeness within each class, then what follows? The explanation concludes, now conjunction is effected through likeness. Therefore, there will be likeness between the initial principles of the lower order and the last members of the higher. So we are seeing the same principle of likeness linking all the orders into one long chain. So even though we talk of separate orders, there is a sense in which they're not really separate at all. We saw this idea once before. It was all the way back in Proposition 112, which reads that the first members of any order have the form of their priors. For the highest classes in each order are conjoined with the superadjacent principles because of their likeness to them, and because of the continuity of procession in the universe, so that they are endowed with a form akin to the nature of the superadjacent order, and reproducing the attributes proper to it. The distinctive character of their being thus appears as a reflection of their priors. This book that we're reading here is called Elements of Theology, and yet even though it is a theology, the gods were not brought in until Proposition 113, the next one here. The first 112 propositions gave us a foundation to work from, a vocabulary to work from, and an organization, a logos, if you will. What Proclus has been doing from Proposition 113 on is he has been plugging the gods into this framework that he laid out and bringing it to life. What we are really looking at is something akin to a long chain of reflections. It is like a series of mirrors set up in such a way so as to bounce the same image from one mirror to the next. Only in this scenario, instead of the image being exactly the same, it weakens and becomes more diffused from one mirror to the next. And this is the significance, by the way, of power being commensurate with unity. And so we have this increased differentiation, increased multiplicity as reality unfolds. And yet, because of reversion, all of it folds back into unity. So when you put Propositions 146 and 147 together, you get a beautiful dynamic image of the unfolding of and returning to unity. And for those of you who want to see this even more deeply, I recommend comparing what we are seeing here to Proposition 35. And there is a video on that, of course, in the playlist. For now, though, I'm going to go on to Proposition 148, because this is another mind blower. As with Proposition 35, this one is putting together the three aspects of metaphysical triads. Here is what Proclus is doing here in Proposition 148. Every divine order has an internal unity of threefold origin, from its highest, its mean, and its last term. From here, Proclus is going to systematically discuss each of the three moments in the triad. Here's what he says about the highest term. For the highest term, having the most unitary potency of the three, communicates its unity to the entire order and unifies the whole from above while remaining independent of it. Here's what is probably a familiar triangle diagram. I've used it before. We can talk about any order as three moments: remaining, proceeding, and reverting. In the hyparxis, or the highest term, we are talking about the order in its most unified aspect, and this term has a transcendent quality. It unifies the whole from above while remaining independent of it. This is indicating transcendency. And Dodd cites Proposition 125 here. Proposition 125 reads, "From that station wherein he first reveals himself, every God proceeds through all the secondary orders, continually multiplying and particularizing his bestowals, yet preserving the distinctive character of his proper nature." And in that last part in particular, we're seeing the transcendency of that highest term. And this brings us to the next section of Proclus's explanation. Secondly, the mean term, reaching out toward both the extremes, links the whole together with itself as mediator. It transmits the bestowals of the first members of its order. It draws upward the potentialities of the last, and it implants in all a common character and mutual nexus. For in this sense also givers and receivers constitute a single complete order, in that they converge upon the mean term as on a center. And Dodd cited Proposition 132. This is the one that we looked at just a few moments ago, that all orders of gods are bound together by mean terms. For the sake of focusing on the middle term, I will stretch the triangle out into a straight line. Now, Proclus starts off his explanation here by saying that the mean term links the whole together. And he says that it transmits the bestowals of first members of its order. And then next, Proclus states that the mean term draws upward the potentialities of the last. In this way, Proclus says, it implants in all a common character and mutual nexus. And he says givers and receivers constitute a single complete order, and that they converge upon the mean term is on a center. And now we get to the extremity, what Proclus is here calling the limiting term. He says, thirdly, the limiting term produces a likeness and convergence in the whole order by reverting again upon its initial principle and carrying back to it the potencies which have emerged from it. Notice that he is drawing on Proposition 146, which is the one that started this video. So there's a building from Proposition 146 to 147, and now further building yet. So now Proclus is telling us that by reverting to its original principle, it carries back to it the potencies which have emerged from it. His conclusion then is, thus the entire rank is one through the unifying potency of its first terms, through the connective function of the mean term, and through the reversion of the end upon the initial principle of procession. The result then is that the whole order is unified. It has what Proclus called in the opening sentence here, in internal unity. In other words, the three moments are not separate. They are the threefold origin of the whole that is one unified divine order. All right, proposition 149. The entire manifold of divine Henads is finite in number. This proposition is reminiscent of where Proclus's discussion of the gods began. It all started with proposition 113, that the whole number of the gods has the character of unity, and this divine series has for antecedent cause the One. And having as its cause the One means that the series of Henads stand nearest to the One. And standing nearest to the One, it cannot be infinite, since the infinite is not cognate with the One, but it is alien from it. For if the manifold as such is already a departure from the One, it is plain that an infinite manifold is completely bereft of its influence, and for this reason bereft also of potency and activity. In other words, a manifold or the many are a step away from unity, and then an infinite manifold would be even farther removed. The manifold of gods is therefore not infinite, but it is marked by unity and limit, and this in a higher degree than any other, since of all manifolds it is nearest akin to the One. Were the first principle a manifold, then each should be more manifold in proportion as it stood near to that principle, likeness being proportionate to nearness. But since the primal is one, then a manifold which is conjoined with it will be less manifold than one more remote. And the infinite, far from being less manifold, is the extreme manifold. I think this one is more straightforward than most. Proclus is reiterating the unfolding of reality from the most unified to the most differentiated. And since the divine Henads stand nearest to the One, they are unified and so finite in number. And I'll wrap up today's video with proposition 150. Any processive term in the divine orders is incapable of receiving all the potencies of its producer, as are secondary principles in general of receiving all the potencies of their priors. The prior principles possess certain powers which transcend their inferiors and are incomprehensible to subsequent grades of deity. Now, this proposition is going to tie together a number of different propositions. One that is actually not even cited by Dodds, but perhaps worth revisiting, is proposition 7. And that is because this is the proposition that stated that every productive cause is superior to that which it produces. A basic premise underlying all of Platonic metaphysics. And also notice the focus in this proposition on power. We see that here as well. Potency is another way of talking about power. Okay, so here's how the explanation begins. For if the gods differ in their distinctive properties, The characters of the lower pre-subsist in the higher, whereas those of the higher and more universal are not found in the lower. The superior deities implant in their products some of their own characters, but others they pre-embrace as transcendent attributes. This idea of pre-existing is not new. We saw it, for example, in Proposition 67. Here, Proclus introduced the terms whole before the part, whole of parts, and whole in the part. And you can see the part in yellow, that this is the part that is relevant to us, that this form pre-existing in the cause, we give the name of whole before the part. So there is the idea of pre-existing. And Proposition 69, by the way, might be worth reviewing as well for those of you who would like to see this more clearly. But coming back to our current proposition, we see that if characteristics pre-subsist in the higher, then the higher are more comprehensive. And that leads us into sentence 2. For it has been shown that the gods near to the one are more universal, while the more remote are more specific. And since the former have more comprehensive potencies than the latter, it follows that gods of secondary and more specific rank will not comprehend the power of the primal. So now Proclus is bringing in the terms universal and specific, building on the issue of comprehensiveness that was already introduced. And here is where that terminology was first introduced. Proposition 126, a God is more universal as he is nearer to the one, more specific in proportion to his remoteness from it. And thus, he concludes the first paragraph, in the higher gods there is something which for the lower is incomprehensible and uncircumscribed. And this is drawing on the notion of relative infinity. Now, if you glance ahead, you'll notice that Dodd cited Proposition 93 in the next line. And this is where we were first introduced to this idea of relative infinity. All infinitude in things which have being is infinite neither to the superior orders nor to itself. And to whomsoever anything is infinite, to him it is also uncircumscribed. Because when you know something, you can say it is this. You can see the whole of it. You can circumscribe it, if you will. But that which is infinite is uncircumscribed. There's no limit. The infinite is therefore not completely knowable. You can know that something is infinite, but you cannot know all the content that is infinite. For though they extend themselves toward it with whatsoever reach, yet it has something which altogether transcends them. Though all of them enter into it, yet it has something which for secondary beings is occult and incomprehensible. Though they unfold the potencies contained in it, yet it has something unattainable in its unity, an unexpanded life which evades their explication. But containing and determining itself as it does, it cannot be infinite for itself, and still less for those above it, since it possesses but a parcel of the infinitude which is in them. And we want to hold on to this as we go back to Proposition 150. So again, he stated here that in the higher gods there is something which for the lower is incomprehensible and uncircumscribed. And that's what we just saw in Proposition 93. And then he goes on to say, it has in fact been shown that each divine principle is in this sense infinite, not for itself and still less for its priors, but for all of its consequence. It can know itself and it can know that which is after it, but it cannot fully know its priors. Now, the divine infinitude is an infinitude of potency, and the infinite is incomprehensible to those for whom it is infinite. To go this next step, Proclus is drawing from Proposition 86. All true being is infinite, neither in number nor in size, but only in potency. And infinity itself, you might recall, is an infinity of potency. And coming back to Proposition 150, the last part of this sentence, reading, and the infinite is incomprehensible to those for whom it is infinite. This is putting this idea of potency together with Proposition 93. Hence, the inferior principles do not participate all the potencies which are pre-embraced by the superior. Otherwise, the latter would be no less comprehensible to the secondaries than the secondaries to them. This again is what Proclus explained in Proposition 93. The lower is completely contained within the higher, but the higher includes that which is beyond the lower, and so not comprehended by it. And so this is the conclusion. Thus the lower, being more specific, possess only certain of the potencies of the higher, and even these they possess in an altered fashion, because of the infinitude which causes the higher to overpass them. And so what I hope I have shown in this video is that Proclus is bringing the framework he built in the first 112 propositions. He's bringing that framework to life and filling that framework with God's. So let me know in the comments section if you're finding this helpful and if you have any questions. And there's also an email address in the description box if you have a question that you don't want to send out to the whole world in a public forum like the comment section. And also, if you're finding this helpful, I would appreciate you hitting the like button, and I do hope you'll join me next time. Thank you very much.